Maxie opened her mouth to tell one truth and accidentally shattered 3 lives in the same breath. Confessions in Port Charles were rarely neat, but this one was destined to be devastating. Maxie Jones had rehearsed the moment 100 different ways. In her head, it was controlled, calm, maybe even noble. What she hadn't prepared for was the way truth multiplies once it's spoken, how one sentence can echo differently in every heart that hears it. She stood in the living room, hands trembling despite her effort to stay composed. The people in front of her mattered too much. That was the problem. If they'd been strangers, this would have been easy. But love had a way of raising the stakes until honesty felt almost cruel. "I need to say something," Maxie began, forcing herself not to look away. The room stilled. She took a breath, then another, and finally she said it, the secret she'd carried, justified, buried, and rewritten so many times she'd nearly believed her own version of it. The truth landed hard. The first heart broke in silence. Shock registered instantly, eyes widening as if the room itself had tilted. This wasn't just betrayal, it was realization. Pieces of the past suddenly fit together in a way they never had before, and the clarity was brutal. No yelling, no tears, just the quiet devastation of knowing that something precious had been built on a lie. Maxie saw it happen and nearly stopped herself from continuing. Nearly. The second heart broke in anger. Words flew fast and sharp, each one fueled by hurt that had been simmering under the surface for longer than anyone realized. Accusations collided with apologies. Love turned defensive, then desperate. This heartbreak was loud, messy, and impossible to ignore. It demanded answers that Maxie didn't have and forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve. "I trusted you," came the accusation, raw and shaking. Maxie swallowed hard. "I know." The third heart broke last, and that one hurt the most. It belonged to Maxie herself, because once the confession was out, there was no hiding behind good intentions. She couldn't pretend she'd done this to protect everyone. She couldn't blame circumstances or timing or fear. She had made choices, and those choices had consequences. As the room emptied, one person storming out, another retreating into stunned silence, Maxie was left alone with the wreckage. The quiet pressed in on her chest, heavier than any confrontation. She slid down onto the couch, staring at the space where they'd been standing moments ago. The truth had done what lies always eventually did. It had detonated. But it had also done something else. It had changed everything. Word traveled fast in Port Charles. By the end of the day, people sensed the shift even if they didn't know the details. Relationships felt fragile. Conversations were careful. Something fundamental had cracked, and everyone was bracing for aftershocks. Maxie faced the fallout head on. She didn't chase anyone down the street. She didn't beg. For once, she didn't try to fix what couldn't be fixed. Instead, she let people feel what they felt, even when it meant being the villain in their story. That wasn't easy for someone who'd built her life on connection. Later that night, Maxie walked along the harbor, the cool air biting against her skin. She replayed every moment that had led her here, the small lies that felt harmless, the half-truths she'd convinced herself were necessary. She'd told herself she was sparing feelings. What she'd really been doing was delaying pain. Now the pain was everywhere. But something unexpected followed the heartbreak. Clarity. For the first time in a long while, Maxie wasn't juggling versions of herself. She wasn't adjusting the truth depending on who was listening. She was just honest, bruised, exposed, real. The next day brought consequences. One relationship stood on the edge of collapse, trust hanging by a thread that's so thin it could snap at any moment. Another shifted permanently, no longer romantic, no longer safe, but maybe something quieter and truer in the long run. And the third, that one walked away entirely, leaving a silence that felt final. Maxie accepted it all. She knew apologies didn't erase impact. She knew love didn't automatically mean forgiveness, and she knew that growth sometimes required losing the very things you're trying to protect. Still, as painful as it was, she didn't regret telling the truth. Because lies had kept her stuck, circling the same mistakes, repeating the same patterns. The confession, devastating as it was, forced everyone involved to move forward, whether they were ready or not. And in Port Charles, movement meant change. Maxie stood at the window of her apartment that night, city lights flickering below. Her worlds looked different now, smaller in some ways, emptier in others, but it was also clearer. 3 hearts had broken, and from the cracks, something new was beginning to form. Not perfection, not forgiveness, but truth. And in a town built on secrets, that kind of honesty had the power to change everything.